Hello everyone! We often get the question on how to photograph, or in other words expose, in snow. And what a coincidence, it has been snowing! My name is Amri, Wolf.Amri on Instagram, and in this video I will explain how to set your camera to get the best snow images. As you know, I always want to make you understand the things you do rather than just mimic me or someone else on YouTube. So let's first find out what happens when you photograph snow. When you take an image of a scene, the camera always thinks it's a picture of a grey card, so medium grey, or in other words, medium bright. But snow is white. We don't want to have it look like medium grey. We want to have it white. To make that easier to understand, let me take one shot of snow in the sun and another one of snow in the shade. Believe it or not, that's the result side by side. Why do they have the same brightness, even though we all know that there is a huge difference between snow in bright sunlight and in the shade? And moreover, why are they grey instead of white? That's actually quite easy to understand. Your camera doesn't know that you're photographing snow. It doesn't even know that the scene you're photographing is white. In fact, it knows absolutely zero about your scene. And not knowing anything, it has to assume. No matter if it is white snow or black charcoal, the camera assumes it is an image of a grey card. So it wants to output the brightness as medium grey, which is exactly between white and black. That means it brightens the charcoal to become medium grey and darkens the snow to become medium grey. Now, why in the world would the camera think you're always photographing something that is medium grey, or in other words, medium bright? Remember, I told you it doesn't know what you're photographing, so it has to assume. To find a base for that assumption, camera manufacturers analyzed millions of images and found out that the average brightness is exactly in the middle between white and black. So they made this the reference for every camera. Very often that works pretty well, because most scenes indeed have a lot of different tones ranging from bright to dark. The camera measures the complete frame, calculates the average brightness, and that is very often just that, medium bright. So exposing for something that is right in the middle works just fine. But you can imagine that this is not always the case, and that brings us back to snow. A snowy landscape is obviously brighter than that standard scene. Your camera, thinking this is medium grey, will choose exposure settings that will result in this. Are we happy with that? Nope. So we need to change that. To compensate for that wrong assumption that every image is medium bright, we have to brighten all scenes that are brighter than medium grey, like for example shots that contain a lot of snow, and darken scenes that are darker than medium grey, like our charcoal, but also for example images of the moon or the Milky Way. Since I mentioned the word compensate, one way would be to use the exposure compensation function of a camera, the other would be manual exposure. Today we will use exposure compensation. But if you want to learn manual exposure, I strongly recommend our YouTube photography course on this channel. So you'd better hit the subscribe button. The exposure compensation can be activated using the +/- button on most cameras. More advanced cameras have a dedicated dial for that function. Plus will give you a brighter image, minus a darker image. Since our snow image came out too dark, we will choose a positive correction to get a brighter image. So far so good. As a rule of thumb, you would expose 1 to 2 stops brighter. A stop brighter in the photography world means doubling the brightness, and that's what the numbers stand for. 2 stops would be doubling that doubling, so 2 by 2, which is 4. So an exposure compensation of 2 stops is 4 times the brightness of our original image. But that's just the rule of thumb. Being the inquiring perfectionists that we are not happy with the rule of thumb, are we? We want to make sure we are spot on with our snow exposure, and that is a great time to make use of our camera's histogram. I'm not going into detail on the histogram because I have a very detailed and easy to understand video about that. I will link you to that at the end of the video. But just in a nutshell, the histogram is a bar graph that shows the distribution of different brightness levels within your image. So how many pixels are white black, and anything in between. The bar for the white pixels is on the right and that for the black pixels on the left. This is the image the camera would have taken without any exposure compensation. There are no bars on the right side of the histogram because there is nothing white in the image, despite snow being white. So we need to shift these bars over to the right so that they just slightly touch the right side. That means the brightest parts of our image are now really white. But it is important that they only touch the side and only the brightest parts. If you go too far, you will move all those parts in your image that represent the brightness level over the edge and they would all become totally white. That moving over the edge is called clipping and means these parts of your image will have the same brightness, 100% white, without any texture. So touching is fine, clipping is bad. That was pretty easy, no? Let me next draw your attention to this info here. In our initial image that said 0. In our final image it says plus 1.7. The camera thought the initial image was correctly exposed, hence the 0. In other cameras you might see this graph instead, but the effect is exactly the same. Now the camera thinks we are 1.7 stops overexposed, but the histogram shows we are not. The histogram can greatly help you exposing your images, but unfortunately it's not always as easy because more often than not you don't have anything in your frame that is white. Also, it is really very small on some cameras like here in my Sony, so it's pretty hard to see whether the whites really touch the right side. Some cameras, particularly mirrorless cameras, have another cool tool that helps you with exposure, the zebra function. You can set that in the menu. I have set mine so that the parts of an image that are 100% white will show a zebra pattern in the display. Look at this. I make the image brighter, 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 and all of a sudden I see the zebra pattern showing up. Now I know that this part will be 100% white without texture. That seems too much. We only want the brightest parts of our image to be white, not such a big area. So I dial the exposure compensation back by one click to avoid clipping. And all of a sudden we are at plus 1.7 again, just like with the histogram. But stay with me, we are not done yet. That exposure compensation of plus 1.7 stops depends on how much of your image is covered by the snowy areas. Just because an image contains a bit of snow doesn't mean you should automatically dial in that number. Remember, I was talking about the average. If only a bit of your image is covered by snow, like in this example, and most of it is rather dark, your camera will calculate an average brightness of the sky, the snow, and the skier. Or in this example, the black in the river and the trees will lower the average brightness of the scene too. So you cannot just go and dial in that 1.7 stops for every image that contains snow. Use the histogram or the zebra pattern to get the perfect exposure. And that's it. I hope it was helpful. See you in the next video.